So I want to welcome everybody to our seminar or webinar rather on the current state of emergency that we have in this country and world in regard to issues of war and peace. We are delighted to have you all with us. I'm Madeline Hoffman. I'm your host for this evening, and I am the co-chair of the Green Party U.S. Peace Action Committee, otherwise known as GPACs. I am also a member on the board or the Green Council of the Green Party of New Jersey. I've been a candidate for public office 3 times out of the last 4 years, twice for US Senate and once for New Jersey governor. And in the 90s, I was also a candidate at the federal level and also for New Jersey governor. So, and US Congress and US Senate back in no, I'm sorry. U.S. Congress and Ralph Nader's vice presidential running mate for the state of New Jersey in 1996. So that's a little bit about who I am. I don't know how many of you heard, but the Senate just slipped in another $12 billion in aid for Ukraine into a bill that's designed to be a stopgap measure to keep part of the government from shutting down. So, you know, we for so long, I was the director of a nonprofit peace organization, Peace Action. We have a couple speakers from Peace Action tonight. For all of the time that I was director of Peace Action, bad priorities, skewed priorities, budget priorities, favoring the, for all of that time as director of New Jersey Peace Action every year. And for the years before that, yes, it was 12 billion. I think that's what I said, Lori. That it was this on top of the $50 billion that had been allocated in the last couple of bills. So we're talking about a lot of money. But this is the way the United States does business. We have a budget, and the more than 50% of the discretionary spending generally is allocated towards the military. And this is this is a recipe for disaster, especially after the pandemic and during the pandemic, when lots of money was needed for housing, to provide housing, to provide healthcare, to provide infrastructure repair, to deal with the issue of climate change, which we will be looking at a little bit more closely a little bit later on. The hot spots around the world, yes, I've mentioned Ukraine, but there are also other hot spots where, you know, something could, one wrong move by one party could result in catastrophe. And we're going to talk about that tonight as well, and how instead of escalating by sending more money or more weapons, we as a nation, we should be pushing for more negotiations. We should be pushing for diplomacy. This is, I mean, the only time when you really need diplomacy and negotiations is with people you consider to be your enemies, and not with people you consider to be your friends. And at this point in time, I don't know, for as long as I've been alive, really, Russia has been an enemy has been designated as an enemy, despite the fact that during World War II they were our ally and lost 26 million people in that fight. You know, at some point or another, we've talked about the peace dividend for a long time too. You know, as peace organizations, at some point we have to become serious about the peace dividend. Take the money that we don't need to spend on war and use that money to create a more peaceful world. And I believe that many of the people who will speak tonight are going to speak about how to create a more peaceful world, how we move ahead with negotiations and diplomacy, how we change direction. And I'll say it again, how we move away from escalating an escalation of the conflict to any of the conflicts around the world, whether they be between Palestine and Israel, whether they be other Middle Eastern countries, whether it's China with China, whether it's with Russia. You know, there's a better way than what our country is doing, and a way that will guarantee more peace and security for all, genuine peace and security for all. And with that said, I want to acknowledge Sarah, who will read land acknowledgement, because we can't really talk about ending violence in this country unless we take ownership of the violence that the settlers perpetrated on Native Americans. So Susan, you're up, or Sarah, excuse me.
Now, this land acknowledgement is specific to the Kansas City area, but it applies to other areas as well. Indigenous peoples have been connected to the land that is now called Kansas City for thousands of years. I joined this meeting from the occupied territories of the Kaw-Kansa and Osage nations. Many others have lived around this area over time, and there are currently more than 98 Native tribes represented in the Kansas City area. We respect all Indigenous peoples, past, present, and future, for their continuing presence in the homeland and throughout the Native diaspora. This acknowledgement is part of our responsibility to critically look at colonial histories and their present day implications.
Thank you, Sarah. Once again, let me say that we're going to take questions at the end, questions, and for now then we move to Haig Hovanes, and I'm going to give you a bio on him, a short bio on him. And what I know most from my own experience is that he's the co-chair of GPACS along with me. I've known Haig for a number of years now because of that, but he's also a longtime peace activist with a background in information technology. And Haig, if you wish to add more, please do. But he's going to be speaking about the current situation in Ukraine and Russia and where it's headed if we don't change direction quickly.
Thanks,
Haig?
Madeline.
You're welcome.
I'm going to share my screen because I've got a few slides I want to show. And not too many. I don't have much time, so I'm going to just deal with some salient points. And the two great global threats today are climate change and nuclear catastrophe, global nuclear war. There's an important difference. Climate change proceeds slowly, and unfortunately, the results are predictable, but they are some time off in the future. the increasing severity. Nuclear war can kill you today. Actually, nuclear war can kill you within the next hour. If a decision is made on the other side of the world to launch, it won't take much more than 30 minutes for that warhead to arrive. If you're within 5 or 10 miles of a major city in the United States in a strategic nuclear exchange, you'll be killed immediately. If you're in a 50-mile radius, you'll probably die within a week. And the least fortunate people will be in the outer districts away from the ground zeros, and they will witness the collapse of civilization and everything, all the horrors that come with that. You can read Cormac McCarthy's The Road or see the film if you want to get more of a picture what that means. So it's about the worst thing that can happen, and it can happen very quickly. In Ukraine, there's a major war on the continent of Europe. Tens of thousands of military have been killed. Fortunately, not too many civilians so far. But both NATO, the US on one side and Russia on the other show no interest in backing away, which means the war has been gathering intensity and escalation is taking place. And what happened in 1945 with the invention of nuclear weapons was a fundamental change in the character of armed conflict. It used to be that you could win an armed conflict by utilizing superior force. So for all of recorded history, escalation has worked. You know, if you had a better sword or a chariot or an airplane or a submarine, you could prevail. But the escalation ladder now has a stopping place. And some people call it omnicide. It's basically killing most of the world's population. If not immediately in nuclear strikes, then eventually through nuclear winter and massive famines because of crop failures. So it doesn't work anymore, but because of cultural inertia, all these states believe in saber-rattling military buildups and the path of conflict. And what we're seeing in Ukraine is a dangerous escalation. And these scenarios, any one of which could lead to a nuclear war. Early on in the war, a no-fly zone was proposed. Biden said that's not a good idea because that would lead to World War III. But the escalation has still proceeded. At one point, the US said it might destroy the Black Sea Fleet. Some military man flexing his muscles said that. The Russians would probably react to that in a massive fashion. There could be a false flag tactical nuclear attack. One side or the other sets off the weapon as a pretext for a larger exchange to decide the conflict. There could be a direct intervention by NATO troops coming across the Polish border to tilt the balance. And if it were overwhelming, the Russians would probably resort to nuclear weapons. Or Russia could come across the Polish border to stop the flow of weapons. And that would be an Article 5 situation. NATO could retaliate with nuclear weapons. And then lastly, there could be a very serious escalatory event, possibly a covert action. And guess what? A couple of days ago, someone blew up the Nord Stream pipelines. Nord Stream 2, which is one of the two that was destroyed or damaged to be inoperable, cost $10 billion and paid for by Russia and Germany. And now there's no possibility of the Germans getting gas, which they urgently need, from Russia. And nobody has claimed doing this, but the expression cui bono, who benefits, is relevant for making reaching some conclusions. The U.S. now gets to sell liquefied natural gas with without any prospect of substitution on the part of the Europeans. They basically have to buy it from us. The U.S. has spoken out against these pipelines for years. And at one point, Biden indirectly threatened that it would never open if the Russians invaded. So I think some educated guesses can be made here. And this is a kind of serious escalation that may have far-reaching consequences. There are US nuclear weapons in Europe. There are 160 nuclear bombs spread out in different NATO bases. They are effectively tactical nuclear weapons because through ingenious design, their yield can be adjusted from under a kiloton to 350 kilotons. And just as a point of reference, the Hiroshima bomb was 15 kilotons. So at its maximum setting, it's 20 times more powerful. And these are just the aircraft delivered bombs. There are plenty of missiles on US submarines, British submarines, French submarines. So it's a powder keg. All this stuff is ready to go if we start moving up to the end of the escalation ladder. In the United States, we have an extra cause of concern because for historic reasons, only one man, one person, the president, can make this decision. And there is no safeguard. No one can countermand the president's decision. The vice president is responsible for authenticating that the president has in fact issued the order. But if you consider the man who's in the Oval Office now, he has some signs of impairment. And the fact that the decision is in his hands, or whoever his most persuasive advisor is that day, is deeply worrying. When studying this issue, I came to the unhappy conclusion that nobody wants to know what all of those attack plans are. Because really, if we knew what those plans were, we'd be responsible for them. So there's never really been much of a public outcry to determine what the scope of America's nuclear attack plans are. I'll finish by explaining again this qualitative difference in the nuclear threat. If it happens, it will happen very quickly. A theater exchange, NATO versus Russia in Europe, would take about 3 hours because the aircraft would have to go back and forth to deliver their bombs. If that escalates into a counterforce missile exchange where just missiles and military targets are being hit, that would be over in about 45 minutes. And then in a total exchange, counter value, where each country is trying to destroy its potential to for recovery, all of its civilian infrastructure, that too would only take about 45 minutes. So in 6 hours, you probably have well over 100 million immediate casualties, several multiples of that in the following days, and then who knows what sort of outcome for a nuclear winter. My last slide just puts it very bluntly. This is an emergency, and I'm not using that word lightly. We're in a state of hostilities, fighting a proxy war, which at any moment could lead to a misstep, leading to the beginning of use of nuclear weapons. Both sides are escalating. The US refuses to press for negotiations. And most worryingly, our foreign policy establishment has been making major miscalculations and errors for 20 years. Everything they've touched has turned to blood and rubble. And these are the people who are going to make the decision about going further up the nuclear, the escalation ladder. So we are at risk of blundering into a catastrophic nuclear war. And I think all peace activists need to respond accordingly and begin to work jointly toward some sort of action to prevent this terrible outcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Haig. Once again, let me remind you that if you have questions or comments, take a note, make a note of it. And when we're finished with the dialogue, and there will be dialogue. I would, we'll be calling on people to add their voices to what's being said. And I need to say also that the Peace Action Group I worked for was founded in 1957, and it was founded in 1957 in response to the dropping of the atomic bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And so I'm grateful to everyone who's put that into context for now. And I'm not sure we're blundering, to be honest, Haig, and other people can chime in later. I think, if you look at what the US has been doing in Ukraine for the since 2014, at least, if not before, I think this has been very clearly thought out. But yeah, I mean, the end point, whether it's a blunder or deliberate, the end point is something we need to avoid, surely. Okay, so now I'm going to introduce Susan Mirsky. Susan Mirsky, speaking of nuclear disarmament, is the chair of nuclear disarmament of the Nuclear Disarmament Working Group and on the board of Massachusetts Peace Action. She's been working on nuclear issues since 1959. And she's also a member of a local peace group in Newton, Massachusetts, called Newton Dialogue on Peace and can't read my own handwriting. But a dialogue for peace. Susan, you're on.
So that's Newton Dialogues on Peace and War.
I thought so, but it didn't look like I had an extra letter in there.
Yeah,
My apologies.
we thought about calling it Newton Dialogues on War and Peace, but we thought, that would be too literary. So we decided not to go
Yes.
there.
You didn't want to go this whole story route. No.
Unless we wanted to have our programs at the library, in which case that would be a great end. So I just, and first of all, thank you very much, Haig, because you really laid out in clear terms what the nuclear threat is. So thank you very much. So I will do that. And I have nothing prepared. This is a discussion. In my introduction, I said this little bit about 1959, and that was in New Jersey when, as a high school student, we became involved with the Committee for Sane Nuclear Policy. And I was a high school student, and we thought, those adults don't know what they're talking about. So we organized the Youth Committee for Sane Nuclear Policy because we thought, we're the young people, we know what we're talking about. And in a way, this was a lesson for me that young people really have a different perspective, and it is important to have their voices heard, engage with them, and include them in what we do. That we need to learn from them and see what they can learn from us all guys. I looked at the title of this, Strategies for Educating the Public and for Building the Peace Movement. So many of the organizations, peace organizations that I come in contact with are all asking this question. How do we build movement on the one hand, and then also how do we talk with people who don't agree with us or who are not a part of the peace movement? Because as Haig, you pointed out how horrific a nuclear war will be and how quickly it would happen. And so many people, when I talk with people, it feels like it's too big for them. It's too scary for them. There are people who are working on whether it's health issues, housing, all kinds of the other day-to-day problems that people have, and they cannot deal with this overarching thought of the end of civilization. And also, I think they feel that, and something that you pointed out, Haig, is that they have no agency in making any change. There's nothing that they can say. This is something that's just dealt with within the administration. So one of the things that we all, I think, are trying to do is, how do we branch out? How do we talk with people who have a difficulty in embracing the dangers of nuclear war? In Mass Peace Action, we have lots of working groups working on all kinds of issues of peace and justice. Within the Nuclear Disarmament Working Group, we have a TPNW group. Lately, they were very involved in a legislative agenda of doing a nuclear weapons commission bill, which would be looking at all the ways in which nuclear weapons impact the citizens of Massachusetts. We look at both state legislation that we can affect and also national legislation that we can affect. And this is the Eleanor Holmes Norton bill, now the Jim McGovern bill, that is basically a back from the brink bill. We work with faith communities. We reach out. We've got a program, Fund Healthcare, Not Warfare, making bridges with communities, with nurses, with teachers. Now we're working with the Diffuse Nuclear War. And if you don't know about them, please go to their website, because there are actions on the 14th and the 16th, and also the TPNW legislators and localities helping communities work on getting the ICANN bill passed. And I think my time is up.
Thank you, Susan, for your comments and for being aware of the time limit. You said a lot of things in your presentation. And Massachusetts Peace Action has done a lot of grassroots organizing over the years and currently. And so I think that what you put forward is a part of what we need to do, because it's not just the nuclear weapons we're talking about. It's the money that's used to fund the wars and to fund the nuclear weapons that's taking money away from people who desperately need it, more and more, actually, as time goes on. Okay, so thank you again, Susan. Our next speaker in this dialogue is Rich Whitney. He's an attorney in Carbondale, Illinois. He's been an activist since the 1970s. He's a member of the Peace Coalition of Southern Illinois, and he's that Peace Coalition's representative to UNAC, United National Anti-War Coalition. And Rich, you have the floor.
All right, thank you very much. I also have a few slides to share. Let me see if I can get those up there. Do you see them now? Okay, I'm assuming
yes, you do see them.
Okay, very, very good. All right, let me go full screen here. Okay, so this presentation, the slides that I'm going to be sharing are admittedly a little bit text heavy. That is deliberate, because these are huge subjects which cannot possibly be fully covered in a few minutes. I cite a number of source materials for you, the viewers, to look at later. so that if you watch the video later, you can then write them down. I will also, if time permits, post some of these sources to the chat after my presentation. So if you want to copy them or just save the chat, you can reference them that way. And I will also make these slides available to GPACs or anyone else who requests them. So with that, the first point I want to make is that the corporate media is one of the biggest obstacles to peace. Have you noticed that in the last few days, after Russian President Vladimir Putin announced that Russia was mobilizing 300,000 army reservists, that you started hearing in the media or reading all kinds of reports about resistors and peace activists in Russia protesting the move? Now ask yourself, when was the last time you heard any representative of the peace movement in the United States getting any kind of coverage in the corporate mainstream media? I can't think of a single instance since 9/11. Why? Well, frankly, the national security state, along with the military-industrial complex, now dominates both the traditional legacy media and social media. It both controls the main messaging and narratives and censors or suppresses journalists and critics who challenge its messaging and narratives. Whereas in the 1950s through the 1970s, the CIA used to heavily influence media messaging by paying and supplying journalistic assets. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you can look up Operation Mockingbird. Now, former employees of the CIA, well, allegedly former employees of the CIA, FBI, NSA, Pentagon, etc., as well as the National Endowment for Democracy and aligned ruling class groups like the Atlantic Council, are directly controlling the media. This is no exaggeration. The sole owner of the Washington Post, Jeff Bezos, is a CIA contractor. Mass media outlets now openly employ intelligence agency veterans like John Brennan, James Clapper, Chuck Rosenberg, Michael Hayden, Andrew McCabe, Liars All, and many, many more. Intelligence agency veterans are also staffing social media giants like Meta, Google, and TikTok to police and suppress content. They pervade seemingly neutral sources of information like Wikipedia. They employ thousands of trolls and content managers to promote the dominant narrative and counter and suppress information that challenges the dominant narrative. This is no exaggeration. Since 2012, when Congress, in its infinite wisdom, amended the Smith-Mundt Act to allow the federal government to propagandize the American people, this is one of the outcomes of that. This is what is happening. We are literally, as taxpayers, paying to propagandize and suppress and censor ourselves. That is literally what is happening right now. This is of critical importance. Making people aware that they are being lied to by the powers that be is an essential first step, like the red pill in the Matrix. If we are going to get masses of people to resist and halt the forever wars, they first need to see clearly what is happening. And for that to happen, they need to understand this. And that's the first step to realize the need to resist what is happening. Now, obviously, and this brings me to my second point, when it comes to corporate media lies and deceptions, the war in Ukraine is a leading case in point. And we're being told all of these lies or distortions relentlessly. We're told, and in fact, contrary to the dominant narrative, the war actually began in 2014 after the US instigated coup, not when Russia began its military operation earlier this year. It was not unprovoked. Russia was never aiming to conquer and annex all of Ukraine or reconstruct the USSR, as some people claim. Nazis really do hold considerable power in Ukraine, notwithstanding Zelensky's Jewish heritage. Russia has not refused to negotiate. It is the US, UK, and NATO that have thwarted peace negotiations. Many of the atrocities attributed to Russia, like the incident at Bucha, are either lacking in evidence or the evidence points to Ukraine false flag operations. And the real US goal here is to weaken Russia and perhaps shore up its domination of Europe. It is not standing up for national sovereignty and international law. Now, obviously, when in addition to that, in order to illustration of that, rather, that the United States is not standing up for national sovereignty and international law. Obviously, we can cite many examples. It hasn't stood up for international law since the Nuremberg tribunals. But one example that I would like to point to is to remind us all about what's happening in Syria. The United States, to this day, you never hear about in the corporate media these days. It's currently occupying about 30% of the territory in Syria, which just happens to be where most of the biggest oil reserves are. And it's literally stealing about 80% of its oil output in the area that it controls. There was no justification for this, for arming insurgents and then bombing and invading. All of this was in violation of international law. And the ongoing occupation in Syria continues to violate international law. A lot of people don't know about this. They don't know what's going on. And incidentally, there is also a relationship between this and the struggle and the conflict in Ukraine, insofar as the U.S. efforts to foment so-called regime change in Syria beginning in 2011, 2012, occurred immediately after President Assad declined to allow an oil pipeline, or maybe it's a natural gas pipeline, to go from Qatar through its territory in order to go to Europe. And Syria opposed this because it felt that this would be unfair to its Russian ally. So the same geopolitics were at work in the case of Syria, and the U.S. is still in Syria, in part, as part of the grander strategy to weaken Russia. And my final point I want to make is that there are concrete actions you can take to resist U.S.-backed or instigated wars and occupations. For the reasons that I've just stated, number one, we have to expose the lies and misleading narratives at every opportunity. We have to, in my view, expose the corporate media's role in promoting false and misleading information. We have to make the general public aware that they're being lied to, and that they're being lied to by denizens of the same U.S. national security state that is thoroughly in control of both legacy and social media. Third, it's very important for us to support alternative media that you can find on places like Substack and some of the sources, the specific real journalists and real analysts that I've cited in this presentation. And then finally, I did want to call attention to the United National Anti-Wars Coalition to get back out into the streets, say no to U.S. wars. UNAC is asking for local peace groups to get out on the streets during that. It's actually an 8-day period. And you have sources there. If you want to read the call, you go to unacnotowar.net. There you can endorse, register, and publicize your own action. I also highly recommend the unacpeace.org website itself. And there it also has a blog that has a lot of great information for you to stay abreast of what's really going on. And I did also wanted to mention very quickly that tomorrow night, UNAC is sponsoring a webinar with Chair Joe Lombardo and former UN Weapons Inspector Scott Ritter on the situation in Ukraine. So you might want to check that out as well. And then finally, again, this is for people who are going to look at this later. You're not going to copy all of this down right now. But these are some of the alternative media sources that I'm referring to that I think are very important that we support. Some of the journalists that I've cited in the earlier ones. Want to quickly call attention to one in particular, moonofalabama.org. It's actually the website of it's obviously a pseudonym, but it's a German journalist who has done really great work. A lot of peace groups are looking to that website to get a much better and thorough handle on what's actually happening in the conflict in Ukraine. But all of these sources cited here are very important. Please consider supporting the alternative media and exposing the corporate media. Thank you.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you. There's so much information there. If people want copies of your slides, should they email you, Rich?
They can email. I'll put this in the chat as well. It's richwhitney@frontier.com, but I'll put it in the chat, and I'll also make it available to GPACs or any other peace group that would like that information, and happy to present to other peace groups as well. Thank you. Okay.
No, thank you, Rich. We miss your voice. I it's ironic that you should have mentioned Scott Ritter at the end of your talk, because I was going to mention him myself in my response. Some of us in the peace action groups, we know that Scott Ritter was right about Iraq. You think back to those days, and he had the courage then to say that he knew there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And he's just written, it says, Reaping the Whirlwind, I believe. It's a very straightforward, honest, clear assessment of where we stand at this particular moment in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. And I recommend it to everyone, and I recommend the webinar tomorrow, conversation with Scott Ritter. All right, next up is Dave Pack. Dave Pack is the treasurer of the board of directors of PeaceWorks in Kansas City, and he was on the National Peace Action Board for 15 years. So, Dave, you're up.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
PeaceWorks Kansas City is an affiliate of the National Peace Action Group, even though the name Peace Action doesn't appear in our name. PeaceWorks has been in existence for 40 years in the Kansas City area, which of course overlaps two states, Kansas and Missouri. A rather unique setting that confuses a lot of people. We don't have any paid staff. So, you know, the miraculous things that Massachusetts Peace Action does, we're really not capable of doing in the situation that we are. We have about 150 to 200 members. You know, we do try our best to interact and cooperate with many other groups. One of which is Veterans for Peace, and Sarah is on this call tonight. I wanted to say a little bit, you know, relative to the Russia-Ukraine war discussion. Thank Haig for his excellent comments. While I'm not, you know, directly involved in peace action on the board anymore, they have a listserv email with I don't know how many, probably hundreds and hundreds of people on it, that I receive emails from the Peace Action listserv, I don't know, 8-10 times a day probably. There are several other people on this call who are on that too. The Ukraine-Russia war has been problematic, you know, for our peace people. You know, there are people who've shared on that listserv essentially the kind of view that Rich just shared, talking about the many negative things that the United States has done, talking about pushing the borders of NATO up to the border of Russia, you know, whatever we did in 2014 in the Civil War, innumerable things that I think the United States has done that many of us don't have any clue about. There's another strain that's gone on that listserv, which has been, well, you know, Putin's a nasty guy and he's an imperialist and he was going to do it no matter what. And there's been quite a bit of agreement that's been evidenced amongst peace people. I think there's a tendency in the United States, you know, to try and phrase things in terms of there's got to be one good guy and one bad guy, and we're always the good guy. And it's just, you know, just garbage as far as I'm concerned. You know, there's two bad guys, and you know, they're both greedy and out for their own benefit. We are not championing diplomacy in Ukraine. We are encouraging war to weaken Russia, as Rich has said. We're risking a nuclear event. We really need to get it over now by supporting diplomacy. And, that's not what's happening. I want to go ahead and just talk a little bit about building the peace movement that was referred to in the flyer for this event. We're a small group affiliate in Kansas City, Kansas and Missouri, both states which are radically red. Missouri used to be purple, but no longer. We need to work in coalition. Going back many years, Peace Action created a community organization directory, which listed about 100 organizations and how to get a hold of them, who was in charge of them, and all that. It was a great project that we did, and we've kind of let it lapse the last few years. We did affiliate with National Peace Action starting in 1996. A great thing for us to do. We are starting to try and get back from the brink resolutions passed in some of the cities in our metro area: Kansas City, Missouri, Kansas City, Kansas, Overland Park, Kansas, Independence, Missouri. And we are reaching out in line with what Back from the Brink tells us to do, to try and have a coalition about this. To have, maybe Veterans for Peace, the Poor People's Campaign in Kansas and Missouri, and other groups be part of this. We're just starting to try and organize this. So we need to work. We also need to work for justice. We also need to work for justice and the environment. We want to be involved in the Poor People's Campaign. We have talked about climate action, not war. Work for justice and the environment. We want to work for valuing all people, for democracy, true democracy. We need to have campaign finance reform. We have people working on ranked choice voting, changing the rules which are intended to marginalize parties like the Green Party, change the lobbying rules. All of these kinds of work are important as we try to build a peace movement. So get out of the silo.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you to wrap it up, Dave, please.
Sure. Get out of your silo. Don't just be anti-war. Be pro-justice. I'll end by sharing with you the quote that Martin Luther King gave in his I Have a Dream speech. "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Remember that. Keep hope. Have faith." I know there's so much discouraging news, about another $12 billion for the Ukraine, about this and that, and one thing and another. But have faith. Keep hope. I think that's important that we do that. Thanks.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And I'm only trying to keep to a time frame here because we want to have some dialogue back and forth. There's
Sure.
a lot of really good ideas out here, and the idea of coalition building, whether, whatever the differences we may have on certain wars specifically, I think we all agree, we probably can all agree that this is an emergency situation. And that we've been split. A lot of the peace movement has been split for many years now, deliberately split, divided. And I think we should take seriously your call and others about forming coalitions. Okay, the next person up, is Sarah Campbell. And Sarah, I know that you're a disabled veteran. You're with Veterans for Peace and you're from Kansas City. If you have more that you would like to add, please do so before you speak. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Madeline. I'm the chapter president of Kansas City Veterans for Peace. I'll give you, for a lot of you, you may not be as familiar with our organization, so I'll give you a little bit of background. We're a global organization of military veterans and allies whose collective efforts are to build a culture of peace by sharing our experiences. As military veterans, we have a greater responsibility to serve the cause of world peace. To this end, we work with others, both nationally and internationally, to increase public awareness of the causes and costs of war, to restrain our governments from intervening overtly and covertly in international affairs of other nations, to resist racism and repression in our home communities, to oppose the militarization of law enforcement, to end the arms race and to reduce and eventually eliminate nuclear weapons, to seek justice for veterans and victims of war, and to abolish war as an instrument of national policy. We believe in something that we say, peace at home and peace abroad. We want to help people see the connection between domestic and foreign policy and how war and militarism negatively impact both. You spoke earlier of coalitions as in addition to being with Veterans for Peace. I'm a community organizer and am involved in many organizations. And part of my work is to build those coalitions. There's a lot of overlap with social justice groups, and when possible, we try to collaborate on projects. We have more power together than individually. So some of the projects that we work on with Veterans for Peace, we have a climate crisis and militarism project formed to address the connections between U.S. militarism and climate crisis, because the U.S. military is the largest single carbon emitter in the world. The largest single carbon emitter in the world. We promote full reporting of and reduction of U.S. military emissions. We work to reduce and redirect the U.S. military budget for human needs. We stand for climate justice and against environmental racism. Another project is a newer one we called Gamers for Peace. U.S. military branches have infiltrated online spaces to target children below legal age in their recruiting efforts. They do this by using charismatic service members to talk to children online through social media like Twitch, Discord, and Facebook. There's a chat feature in these online video games. Using esports teams to appeal to many children's dreams of becoming professional gamers. Attending video game conventions like GalaxyCon, GeekCon, PAX East with cutting edge video game equipment. So we go in and we counter a lot of the misinformation that those kids are getting. It's predatory what the recruiters are doing. We also definitely work towards abolishing nuclear weapons. Veterans for Peace is a member of ICAN, International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. It's a coalition of non-governmental organizations in 100 countries promoting adherence to and implementation of the UN Nuclear Weapons Ban Treaty. As a member, Veterans for Peace is dedicated to pressuring the United States to sign that treaty. We also work on encouraging people to divest from nuclear weapons. Corporations pour millions and billions of dollars into convincing politicians to stay in war. We can curb the power of nuclear weapons corporations by encouraging our governments, universities, churches, cities, banks to divest from nuclear weapons. So we specifically Stop Banking the Bomb, we call it, is against PNC Bank. They are one of the biggest contributors to the government war machine. We're also calling for the end of the use of drones, drone warfare.
Yes.
We call for immediate halt to the drone attacks and a ban on the use of all armed drones. And almost done. And then we have GI resistance, where we popularize resistance to toxic military culture. We talk to current members of the military and encourage them to stand down when they're given illegal orders and help them to get the information needed to avoid prosecution for disobeying orders, and how to get out of the military with an honorable discharge while doing so.
Excellent. Thank you. Again, we have 3 more speakers. I'm going to try to be really strict about the 5-minute limit. If you can speak, limit your words to 3 minutes, that's even better, so that we can begin to share ideas as a panel and encourage comments and questions from the participants, not just the speakers, because there's so much that's been put forward here. I think we could come up with a plan. It's very encouraging to me to hear what everybody's doing. All right, so we have Andre Sheldon next, who's the director of the Global Strategy of Nonviolence. And then we have Virginia Ahern, who's with New Jersey Peace Action, the state that I'm from, and then Don Bryant, who will wrap it up. But so if all of you in the audience, please start thinking about if you want to be on the stack, if you want to make a comment or ask a question, and please post that, say stack in the chat if you're interested in doing so. Okay, Andre, you're up.
Oh, thank you. Namaste. Salam, shalom, peace, mir. I started as an activist after 9/11, specifically to stop war, and I'm in Boston, in the Boston area. And I humbly would like to present an emergency plan, and it's ready now. An amazing opportunity is at our fingertips. Before Russia invaded Ukraine, the whole world was saying no war. And now Russian people are marching in the streets. So now is the time to unite the people of the world, and something special has happened. UN Secretary General Guterres set the stage for a people movement when he issued a call for a global ceasefire. Guterres's one act is the most profound and important global actions because stopping war affects all issues. I am very fortunate to have presented the plans for a new global peace movement to Guterres's staff. And I plan to return to ask Guterres to reissue the ceasefire, and this time with a people movement to back it up. All the mechanisms are in place and the startup plans are ready. All we need is leadership. I'll show you in a minute. The plan is a 3-year plan of action, and with action planned every day. And the war in Ukraine has changed the world in the wrong direction towards militarism and division. So what we're doing now is not working and is getting worse. So we need something different and special. And Gandhi and King were famous for movements of nonviolence. Therefore, I propose a global movement of nonviolence so the people everywhere know what we're doing. And a global movement of nonviolence is an anti-war movement. And the people in every country will be asked to demand that their own government disarm and renounce war as the political goal. But a global movement of nonviolence is also a movement of goodwill to create trust and respect among nations and people. Because without trust and respect, there will be no peace. And a global movement of nonviolence then can unite the climate and the peace movements first. Then all the other movements, all the religions, and all the spiritual organizations, and mayors and community leaders everywhere under one umbrella to create the largest people movement the world has ever seen. And it can begin in the spring of 2023, but we have to act now. So I'm going to share my screen. Here's an outline. And the main elements are that there's an operating system, there's a startup plan with specific details ready to go, an operational plan, and 3-year segment of 10 to 30-year plan. And there's 3 phases starting simultaneously. So the plans are prepared for the largest marketing plan ever devised. In the beginning, it's all about outreach and promotion to enlist people other than the choir, as Susan Mirsky was talking about. So the movement includes the answers to the question, what can I do? A major segment is the local application. And lastly is a plan for nonviolent direct action and lobbying. And there's much, much more. And there are 3 leaders that can make it happen. Naomi Klein, Beatrice Finn, and Medea Benjamin. Beatrice Finn can be the most powerful woman in the peace world right now. If she was to ask the people in the anti-nuke movement to do anything, they would do it. And Naomi Klein, same thing in the climate movement, and Medea Benjamin and all the peace movements. So when these women join together to promote the umbrella movement, it will create a chain reaction of leaders joining around the world, which in turn unites the people in every country. So it's designed to save lives and create political clout to create the atmosphere to reallocate the military spending. That's all of our goal. That's our goal, everyone here on this webinar. So I'm here to ask you today to reach out to these women, ask them to take ownership of the process to get the movement started. It's all about power and creating a new power. COP26 and the NPT conference proved the governments aren't going to stop the war. We need a people movement. So please contact these women leaders. This is the moment in history to do what's never been done before. And the ceasefire has set it all up. So here's my contact information, if I can get it down to the.
Yeah, people want to get this information in their hands. How do they? There we go. There we
Please
go.
contact
Thanks,
me at
Andre.
Facilitator at Global Strategy of Nonviolence. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Andre. Really, really good information. And I just want to say that at the beginning of the global pandemic, the United States refused to join a global ceasefire. And we need to be, as a peace movement, we need to put pressure on our own government to join this. And then also, the Stop the Sanctions movement, where there's economic violence being perpetrated against many countries, even in the midst of, it continued in the midst of the pandemic. So,
thank you.
Really good. And remember, February 2003, how many people were in the streets protesting the upcoming war on Iraq? We can do it. We've seen it done before, right? All right, so our next speaker is Virginia Ahern. I've known Virginia for at least 20 years now. And she helped me become the director of New Jersey Peace Action back in the year 2000, before 9/11 happened. Thank you very much, Virginia. and Virginia, you have 3 to 5 minutes. If you can make it 3, that would be lovely. To add your voice to this dialogue and discussion.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who has spoken before me. I became an activist when I was 19 years old at Rutgers University during the Reagan years. And so this year I'm celebrating 40 years of anti-nuclear activism. I agree with so much of what so many people have spoken. I want to echo something that Susan Mirsky said very early on, which is that so many of these issues and so many issues around the nuclear issue are just too scary for people. And I think that although we all, let me back up. Yeah, the fact that they are too scary for most people gives us the challenge of figuring out how we're going to reach and bring in new people. And a lot of us have talked about how to bring in new people. This scariness is something that Helen Caldicott talked about in the 1980s, and she called it psychic numbing. And I think if most of us went out on the street today with information about the nuclear threat or how close we are to nuclear launch, people would say, because people are just beleaguered, they're exhausted from the pandemic, all of the economic insecurity that most people are facing every day, they would say, fine, so be it. I'll die in a nuclear war, and they will keep walking because they simply cannot add another burden. So I think that is one of the biggest challenges for us. I think the way that we build our movement and bring in new people is not stopping talking about that, but really focusing on the cost of nuclear weapons and how much, and just how much of our tax dollars go to nuclear weapons, and also tying it in to, as Sarah Campbell spoke about, that the US military is the largest contributor to climate change. Or at least to carbon emissions. So those really are my 2 comments. I think that to build our movement and to bring in new people, we need to focus on the cost of what this costs us, of what this costs everyday people, and not bring them in that way. Bring them in that way. They can learn all of the other details of all of the scariness and the horribleness on down the line. Let's just bring them in that way. So that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Virginia. Short and sweet, but right on point. And
That's me. Sure.
So thank you for your contributions to this discussion. We have one more speaker, and then we're going to have crosstalk, I guess, amongst those who have been speaking. And please, if you're going to, again, if you have a question or you want to add, please put it in the chat. Add something to the conversation, please put it in the chat so we can call on you to add your voice to this discussion. All right, so Don, you're up, and somewhere I have your biographical information, but I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself, just so that I don't spend time looking for that at this point in time.
Thank you, Madeline. I'm Don Bryant with Cleveland Peace Action. I'm a board member of the Labor Fight Back Network as well, and the Labor and Community for an Independent Party, the Ohio Poor People's Campaign, etc. So I'm just sharing this is really the only slide I got. But in any case, the US military, or the Pentagon, is the world's biggest climate change enabler. We've heard, and I'm gonna summarize what reporter from Britain, John Gira Lewis, in November 2021 said, and this is available on earth.org. And she says, if the US military were a nation state, it would be 47th largest emitter of greenhouse gases worldwide. In oil consumption in 2017, the US Air Force purchased $4.9 billion in fuel, the Navy $2.8 billion, the Army $947 million in fuel, and the Marines $36 million in fuel, which amounts to 269,230 barrels a day of oil, emitting more than 25,000 kilometers of CO2. So the Pentagon has contributed to our nation's radioactive waste as well. Between 1946 and 1958, the nuclear test on the Marshall Islands equaled 1,000 times that of the Hiroshima bomb. The fallout in the northern atolls forced evacuation of residents, causing birth defects, leukemia, thyroid, and other cancers for 75 years. From 1944 to 77, the Hanford Nuclear Reservation in Washington state released radioactive toxic gases and fluids, affecting the fishing and livelihoods of the people in the area. Uranium mining and atmospheric nuclear tests before the 1963 Limited Test Ban Treaty caused increased cancer among the indigenous people of the northwestern U.S. Military bases are reported as being some of the most polluted sites due to huge amounts of toxic chemicals, including jet fuel components contaminating soil and water surrounding the bases. Of 400 bases known or suspected as contaminators, 149 of them are designated as Superfund sites. The Pentagon tells us that they are working towards being green, but the Union of Concerned Scientists reported that the U.S. Navy quietly shut down its task force on climate change in 2019, which was designated to use our best science to prepare the Navy for global shifts in sea levels, melting ice sheets, and ocean temperatures. Of course, this information would have been very helpful for the rest of the civilian sector as well. U.S. military aid to other nations often ignores human rights and impending climate disaster. That is, until the environmental pollution of, say, the Gaza Strip threatens the occupying power and beneficiary of U.S. weapons, Israel. Israeli newspaper Haaretz reported that a 2019 report from the Eco-Peace Middle East organization warns that the collapsing water, sewage, and electricity infrastructure in the Gaza Strip poses material danger to Israel's groundwater, seawater, beaches, and desalination plants. Neither our government nor Israel are moving quickly enough to lift the siege of Gaza, to ensure sustainability in the region. And another violator of the weapons to Saudi Arabia is a prime example of U.S. weapons rewarding bad behavior in their war on Yemen that pushes the people of Yemen to disease, starvation, and environmental destruction as well. So what do? And I'll put this in the chat. I got 5 steps here. Reduce the Pentagon budget. Hold the Pentagon accountable in 2 ways. Require transparency in the use and disposal of toxic chemicals, fuels, and require reporting and adherence to the laws governing those activities, just as private industry must do, hopefully. And 2B, invite the international community, including U.S. allies, to hold the Pentagon responsible and disassociate from any activities described above. Number 3, stop the Biden administration from granting the Pentagon $1 trillion plan to replace all 3 legs of the nuclear weapons triad, including $100 billion to replace all land-based ICBMs. And instead of that, sign the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which the US has not done yet, as you're probably aware. And number 5, redirect funds to sustaining life instead of destroying life, and declare it an emergency. Thank you.
So much. Thank you so much to everybody who has spoken and contributed such provocative and ideas to what we can do from here. I'm not sure. I think what might be worthwhile is about 10 to 15 minutes of people kind of responding to what each other has said, and people who have spoken, kind of this dialogue to any and all of the people who have spoken so far, to question each other, to talk to one another, to say, I like your idea, let's move it. Is there anybody who wants to kick it off? Go ahead, Susan.
So I was so lucky to go first because then I could listen to everybody else. And I had great reactions, wonderful group of people speaking. And I did put some things in chat. When I go out, one is when I go out and do leafleting about Ukraine, about the military. What I find is that people who, for the most part, are poor, multi-problemed, and we go to the T stop downtown Boston and give them leaflets. They get it. They really get that money really needs to be given for their needs rather than the military. And they're not involved with whether, Republican or Democrat or Green. They get the money aspect. Something else I just threw out was that we need to, I'm very involved with nuclear power, dangers of nuclear power here in the United States, and their relationship to nuclear weapons, making of nuclear weapons, but also right now, the danger of those nuclear power plants in Ukraine, which are a catastrophe just waiting to happen. And it's sort of like, the weaponization of those power plants. Very, very scary. Something else I put in chat is that, go to our universities, our colleges, where, here in the Boston area, we have Raytheon going and selling their wares, military selling their wares. So we go and we call attention to the lies that they are telling students. So many things. And then just wanted to again put in everybody's mind the diffused nuclear war action on the 14th, which is going in front of the state legislature. But also what I didn't mention was the 16th, where you go out to your community, wherever it is, libraries, wherever you are, congregate in your community and talk about nuclear weapons, talk about nuclear war, and engage in conversation.
Excellent, Susan. I should have said, and I didn't, we're going to try to keep the comments within a certain length of time as well. Not too bad, not too bad. I'm not saying that, but it made me think that I should say that, like a couple of minutes per comment so that we can keep it rolling. And then I have a couple more of the speakers who want to say something. And then I'll open it up. I do have a stack that's developed from the audience. So go ahead, please. You're muted though. There you go.
Yeah, two comments. First, I'd like to congratulate Peace Action Massachusetts for chasing Raytheon out of the state. I think that's a really accomplishment. They've decided that the Beltway is more comfortable for their world headquarters than the state of Massachusetts. But more importantly, I think this is a moment of truth for the potential of the peace movement in the United States. And I think there's a simple test for that. which is of the dozen or more organizations represented by individuals here this evening. Are they willing for their organization to endorse any unified action, be it a statement, be it a campaign, be it even a physical gathering, in concert with all of the others? That's really a very simple test. And if we fail that test, then there is no national peace movement. And I think we should have the courage to make that determination rather than pretending to be unified and calling for unity. I think every one of these webinars or discussions among peace groups has mouthed a desire for unity. But this is really the test. Can we come up with something, however modest, that every single peace activist group in the United States joins in?
Thank you. Hi again. I'll just throw in my 2 cents on this. We can all unite behind the fact that there's an emergency. You know, that's the title of this webinar. And if we could issue a statement saying that there's an emergency and we need this global ceasefire, global disarmament, that might do it, but we'd have to talk more about that as we go on. All right, I know David denounced war. I see Chuck's comment in there. Yeah, we may need to add a little bit to it, but that's the basic message. It doesn't work. It's not working to bring about peace and security. Go ahead, David. And we're going to try to keep our comments to 2 minutes. Okay.
Okay. I want to agree with Haig's idea of choosing an action that we can agree on. That would be the best way to address the divisions within the peace movement. Chris has also raised the problem of divisions, and I hope she'll continue on that theme. I think that what Rich suggests, that we unite around the call for actions October 15th through the 22nd, that's a great opportunity for us. If we can state as a group in some way, as a follow-up to this meeting, that we think there is an emergency, and if we can agree to call for such actions, and then maybe that should lead toward a national action by January, that would be even better, a coordinated single action. And I do believe that while we're speaking of unity, we're going to have to address the disunity that is being promoted by some who favor NATO. We haven't seen it here, but it is expressed in some circles. That is, a demand is made that the peace movement must condemn Russia or criticize Russia. And I have my own criticisms of Russia. I consider this an intra-imperialist war, but I think we have to gently reply to demands that we all agree on attacking Russia, because not everyone in the anti-war movement is going to be able to do so or to agree on what terms to attack Russia. And our problem is here at home. That's where we need to direct our attention. Thank you.
There's been a lot of points made. There's been a lot of contacts shared. Yep. And thank you to everybody. I'm going to call the meeting now, and we'll be in touch with everybody. You're all free to go, always are. But thank you so much to everybody, all our speakers, comments. There was a lot of momentum, I think, that was generated by this meeting. And anyway, we'll be in touch. We'll be in touch soon, and we need to take care of what's going on in our world. Thank you.